2. In the land of Knaak, at the very northern fringe of the vast, oppressive desert, which made up much of that land, the small but resolute army of General Augustus Malevolent remained encamped. They had set up camp some weeks previous for reasons that still mystified most of the soldiers, but no one dared question the decisions of the general. Most of these men had followed Malevolent since his early days in Westmarch, and their fanaticism to his cause remained without question. But in silence, they wondered why he seemed unwilling to move on. Many felt certain that it had to do with the more gaudy tent, pitched not far from the commander's own. The tent belonged to the witch. Each morning, Malevolent went to her, evidently seeking portents of the future and making his decisions based upon those. In addition, each evening Galeno made her way to the general's tent for more personal matters. How much influence she had over his choices, none could truly say, but it had to be substantial. And as the morning sun began to peek over the horizon, the slim, well-groomed figure of Augustus Malevolent emerged from his quarters. His pale, clean-shaven features, once described by a now-deceased rival as the very visage of Lord Death, without the kindness inherent, entirely without expression. Malevolent stood clad in armor of the darkest ebony, save for the crimson border running along every edge, especially around the neck. In addition, the symbol of a red fox over 3 silver swords decorated the breastplate, the only reminder of the general's far-flung past. 2 aides attended the general as he put on ebony and crimson gauntlets that looked as if they had just been forged. In fact, Malevolent's entire suit looked to be in perfect condition, the result of nightly cleanings by soldiers trained to understand what even a single hint of rust might mean to their lives. Fully covered, save for his head, Malevolent marched directly toward the sanctum of his sorceress, his mistress. Resembling something of a tent maker's nightmare, the abode of Galeno looked as if it had been put together like a quilt, with patches of more than 24 shades of color sewn together over and over. Only those, like the general who saw beyond the facade, might have noticed that the various colors created specific patterns, and only those cognizant in the inner workings of sorcery would have known the power inherent in those patterns. Behind Malevolent, the 2 aides followed. In the arms of one, a covered burden that vaguely resembled something akin in shape to a head. The officer carrying the object moved uneasily, as if what he held filled him with distrust and not a little fear. The commander did not bother to announce himself, yet just as he reached the closed flap of the witch's tent, a feminine voice, both deep and taunting, bid him to enter. Even though sunlight now toyed with the encampment, the interior of Galeno's tent appeared so dark that, if not for the single oil lamp dangling from the middle of the ceiling, the general and his aides would not have been able to see more than a foot beyond their noses. Had that been so, they would have missed quite a sight indeed. Pouches and flasks and items, unnamed, hung everywhere. Although once offered a case in which to house her wares, the sorceress had declined, finding some purpose in hanging each piece by noose in carefully pre-selected locations. General Malevolent did not question this idiocy so long as he received his desired answers. Galeno could have hung dry corpses from the ceiling and he would have made no comment. She nearly did just that. While many of her prizes remained thankfully hidden within containers, those that dangled free included the desiccated forms of several rare creatures and various components of others. In addition, there were a few items that looked to have come from human sources, although full identification would have required too close an inspection. To further add to the uneasiness, her sanctum engaged in all save her commander and lover. The single lamp somehow created shadows that did not move in conjunction with normal reasoning. Oft-time Malevolent's men would see the flame flicker in one direction, but a shadow move in another. The shadows in general also made the tent seem much larger inside than its outer dimensions warranted. as if by stepping in, the newcomers had entered a place not entirely set in the mortal plane. And, as the centerpiece to this unsettling and distracting chamber, the sorceress Galeno presented the most arresting and yet also disturbing vision of all. As she rose from her multicolored pillows covering the patterned carpet below, a fire stirred within each man. Lush, cascading black hair fell back to reveal a round, enticing countenance marked by full, red, and inviting lips, a generous but pleasing nose, and deep, so very deep green eyes, matched only by the sharp emerald ones of the general himself. Thick lashes half draped over those eyes as the witch seemed to devour each newcomer in turn simply by looking at him. "My general," she purred, each word a promise. Built voluptuously, Galeno displayed her assets as she did every weapon at her command. Her gown had been purposely cut as low as it could, without failing its most basic function, and glittering jewels accented the near edges near her chest. When she moved as if the wind gently pushed her along, her thin garments billowing seductively around her. The visible effect of her charms on Malevolent proved to be little more than a slight touch of his gloved hand on her deep brown cheek, which the sorceress accepted as if he caressed her with the softest fur. She smiled, revealing teeth perfect, save that they had a slight cat-like sharpness to them. "Galena, my Galena, you slept well?" "Well, I actually slept, my general." He chuckled. "Yes, the same, myself." His very slight smile faded abruptly, until I had the dream. "Dream?" The momentary intake of breath before she spoke signaled well enough that Galeno took this comment not at all lightly. "Yes." He moved past her, staring at, without actuality, seeing one of the more macabre pieces of her collection. He toyed with it, moved one of the joints while he spoke. "The warlord of blood, arisen." She swept over to him, a dark angel now at his shoulder, her eyes wide with anticipation. Tell me all, my general. Tell me all." "I saw the armor without the man's struggle from the grave. Then bone filled the armor, with muscle and tendons joining afterward. Then flesh covered the body. But it was not bardic, as his images have shown." The ebony-clad officer seemed disappointed. "A rather mundane face, if anything. But artisans were never known for carving such as those. Perhaps this was the face of the warlord, although he seemed more a frightened soul in my dream." "Is that it?" "No. I saw blood then, on his face. And after it appeared, he marched off. I saw mountains give way to hills, and hills to sand. And then I saw him sink into that sand. And there, the dream ended." One of the other officers caught sight of a shadow in the far corner of the tent. It moved, shifting toward the general. Trained by experience not to speak of such things, he swallowed and held his tongue, hoping that the shadow would not, at some point, later turn to his own direction. Galena draped herself against General Malevolent's breastplate, looking up into his eyes. "Have you ever had this dream before, my general?" "You would have known." "Yes, I would have. You know how important it is to tell me everything." She separated from him, returning to the pile of plush pillows, a glimmer of sweat covering every revealed portion of her body. And this most important of all, this is no ordinary dream. No, no, it is not. I suspected as much myself. He waved one negligent hand toward the aide who carried the cloth-covered object. The man stepped forward, at the same time ripping away the material in order to reveal what lay beneath. A helmet with a rigid crest glistening in the weak light of the single lamp. Old, but intact. It would have covered most of the head and visage of its wearer, leaving but two narrow gaps for the eyes, a slight passage for the nose, and a wider but still narrow horizontal gash for the mouth. The back of the helmet hung low, protecting the neck there, but leaving the throat itself completely open. Even in the dim illumination, one could clearly discern that the helmet had been colored blood red. I thought you might need Bartuk's helm. You may be right. Galena separated herself from Malevolent, reaching out for the artifact. Her fingers brushed the aide's own, and the man shivered. With the general facing away from her and the second officer, unable to see from his angle, the sorcerer took the opportunity to let one hand briefly caress the aide's wrist. She had tasted him once or twice when her appetite had demanded some change of pace, but knew that he would never dare tell his commander of their encounters. Malevolent would more likely have to have him executed, rather than his valued witch. She took the helmet and placed it on the ground near where she had originally been sitting. The general dismissed his men, then joined Galeno there, placing himself directly across from her. Do not fail me, my dear. I am adamant in this. For the first time, a bit of Galena's confidence dissipated. Augustus had always been a man of his word, especially when it came to the fates of those who did not live up to his expectations. Hiding her own concern, the dark sorceress placed her hands palm down on the top of the helmet. The general removed his gauntlets and did the same. The flame in the lamp flickered, seemed to shrink to nearly nothing. The shadows spread, thickened, and yet somehow also seemed more alive, more independent of the frail light. That they had a surreal, unworldly sense to them did not bother General Malevolent in the least, though. He knew of some of the powers with which Galeno conversed and suspected others. As a military man with imperial ambitions, he saw all as useful tools to his cause. Like calls to like, blood to blood. The words slipped readily from Galena's full lips. She had uttered this litany many times for her patron. Let that which was his call to that which was his. What the shadow of Bartuk wore must be linked again. Malevolent felt his pulse quicken. The world seemed to pull back from him. Galena's words echoed, became the only focus. At first he saw nothing but an internal gray. Then, before his eyes, an image coalesced in the grayness. An image somewhat familiar to him. He saw again Bartuk's armor and the fact that someone wore it now. But this time the general grew certain that the man before him could not possibly be the legendary warlord. Who? He hissed. Who? Galena did not answer him. Her eyes closed, her head bent back in concentration. A shadow moved behind her, one that Malevolent vaguely thought resembled some large insect. Then, as the image before him grew, he threw his attention wholly back into identifying and locating this stranger. A warrior, the sorceress murmured. A man of many campaigns. Forget that! Where is he? Is he close? The warlord's armor! After so very long, so many false trails! She twitched from effort. Malevolent did not care, willing to push her to the very limits and beyond if necessary. Mountains! Cold, chill peaks! No help there. The world was filled with mountains, especially in the north and across the Twin Seas. Even Westmarch had its share. Galena shuddered twice. Blood calls to blood. He gritted his teeth. Why repeat herself? Blood calls to blood. She teetered, nearly losing her grip on the helmet. Her link to the spell all but broke. Malevolent did his best to maintain the vision on his own, even though his own magical skills paled in comparison to Galena's. Yet, for a moment, he managed to fix better on that face. Simple, nothing at all like a leader, in some ways, panic-stricken. Not cowardly, but clearly far out of his element. The image began to falter. The general silently swore. The armor had been found by some damn foot soldier of deserter who likely had no idea of either its value or its power. Where is he? The vision faded away with such abruptness that it startled even him. At the same time, the dark witch let out a gasp and fell back onto the many pillows, completely shattering the spell. A tremendous force threw Malevolent's hand from the helmet. A string of harsh epithets burst from the general's mouth. With a moan, Galena slowly rose to a sitting position. She held her hand with one head, and as she looked at Malevolent, he in turn considered whether or not to have her whipped. To entice him with the fact that the armor had been found, and then to leave him without the knowledge of where it was. She read his dark look, and what it likely meant for her. I have failed you, my general. After all this time, Bartuk's legacy is yours to fulfill. Fulfill? Malevolent rose, barely able to keep his frustration and fury in check. Fulfill? Bartuk commanded demons. He spread his power over much of the world. The pale commander gestured at the helmet. I bought that from the peddler as a memento, a symbol of the might I sought to gain, a false artifact. I thought, but well done, the helmet of Bartuk. The general let out a harsh laugh. Only when I put it on did I realize the truth. That was the helmet. Yes, my general. Galena quickly rose and put her hands on his chest, her fingers caressing the metal as if it were his own flesh. And you began to have dreams, the visions of Bartuk. I've seen his victories, seen his glories, seen his strength. I've lived them all. Malevolent's tone grew increasingly bitter. But only in my dreams. It was fate that brought the helmet to you. Fate! And the spirit of Bartuk, don't you see it? He means for you to be a successor. Trust me, the witch cooed. There could be no reason, for you're the only one to see these visions without my aid. True. After the first two incidents, each during a period in which Malevolent had worn the helmet, the general had commanded a few of his own most trusted officers to try the artifact on for themselves. Even those who had worn it for several hours had admitted to no substantial or subsequent dreams of their own. that to Augustus Malevolent had been proof enough that he had been chosen by the spirit of the warlord to take on his glorious mantle. Malevolent knew all that any mortal man could know of Bardatuk. He studied every document, researched every legend, while many in the past have shrunken away from the warlord's dark and demonic history, fearing some taint spreading to themselves. The general had devoured each scrap of information. He could match Bartok in strategy and physical strength, but Malevolent himself wielded only the least bit of magic, barely enough to light a candle. Galena had provided him with more sorcery, not to mention other pleasures. But to truly be able to emulate the warlord's glory, Malevolent needed some manner by which to summon and command not one demon, but many. The armor would open that path for him. Of that, he had become obsessively certain. Malevolent's extensive research had indicated that Bartek had imbued the suit with formidable enchantments. The general's own meager powers had already been augmented by the helmet. Surely the complete, ensorced suit would give him what he desired. Surely the shade of Bartok wanted that. The visions had to be a sign. There is one thing I can tell you, my general, the sorceress whispered. One thing to encourage you in your quests. He seized her by the arms. What? What is it? She grimaced momentarily from the pain of his grip. The fool who wears the armor now, he comes nearer. To us? Perhaps if the helmet and the rest are meant to be with one another. But even if not so, the closer he comes, the better I'll be able to specifically locate him. Galena pulled one arm free, then touched Malevolent's chin. You can wait just a little longer, my love. Just a little longer. Releasing her, the general considered. Will you check each morning and each evening? You will spare no effort. The moment you can identify where this Cretan is located, I must know. I shall march immediately after. Nothing must stand between me and my destiny. He seized the helmet and, without another word, departed from her tent, his aides quickly following into line behind him. Malevolent's mind raced as he pictured himself in the escort's armor. Demonic legions would rise to his command. Cities would fall. An empire spanning the world would spring up. Augustus Malevolent hugged the helmet almost protectively as he returned to his own quarters. Galena had the right of it. He had only had to be a little more patient. The armor would come for him. I will do as you once dreamed of doing, he whispered to the absent shade of Bartek. Your legacy will be my destiny. The general's eyes gleamed. And soon. The witch shuddered as Malevolent vanished through the tent's flap. He had grown more substantial of late, especially the longer he wore the ancient helm. On one occasion, she had even caught him speaking as if he were the warlord of blood himself. Galena knew that the helmet, and likely all the armor, contained some mysterious magical force, but as of yet she had been able to neither identify nor control it. If she could control it, would she not need her lover any longer? A pity in some ways, but there were always other males, other more maleable males. A voice broke the silence, a scratchy, deep voice that even to the witch sounded something akin to the buzzing of 1,000 dying flies.
Patience is virtue. This one should know. 123 years on this mortal plane in search of the warlord. So long. And now it comes together.
Galena looked around at the shadows, searching for one in particular. She finally noticed in a far corner of the tent a wavering insect figure only visible to one who truly looked close. Be silent. Someone may hear.
No one hears when this one chooses,
the voice rasped.
You know that well, human.
Then quiet your voice for my sanity, Xanasax. The dark-skinned sorcerer stared at the shadow but did not approach it. Even after all this time, she did not entirely trust her constant companion.
So tender the ears of a human.
The shadow took more form, now resembling a specific insect, a praying mantis. Yet such a mantis would have been more than 7 feet tall, if not more.
So soft and filling their bodies.
You do well not to talk of failures. A low, chittering noise spread throughout the tent. Galena steeled herself, knowing that her companion did not like to be corrected. Zasax moved, shifting closer.
Tell this one of the vision shared. You saw it, but this one would hear it from you. Please, indulge this one.
Very well. Taking a deep breath, she described it in as good detail as she could man, and the armor. Xanax surely had seen everything, but for some reason, the fool always made her go over the visions. Galena tried to hurry matters by ignoring the man for the most part, going more into the armor itself and the landscape vaguely seen in the background. Zasax suddenly cut her off.
This one knows that the armor is true. This one knows that it wanders this mortal plane. The human. What about the human?
Perfectly ordinary. Nothing special about him.
Nothing is ordinary. Describe.
A soldier, plain of face, a simple fighter, probably the son of farmers from the looks of him. Nothing extraordinary. Some poor fool who stumbled onto the armor and, as the general clearly thinks, has no idea what it is. Again the chittering. The shadow withdrew slightly. When Zasak spoke, he sounded extremely disappointed.
Certain that this mortal journeys nearer.
So it seems. The murky form grew still. Zasax clearly had something in mind. Galena waited, and waited some more. Zasax had no concept of time where others were concerned, only when it came to his own needs and his desires. 2 flashes of deep yellow momentarily appeared where the head of the shadow seemed to be. What might have been the outline of an appendage ending in 3 clawed digits shifted momentarily into sight, then quickly vanished again.
Let him come, then. This one will have decided by then whether one puppet is better than another.
Zasak's form grew indistinct. All semblance of a mantis, of any creature, faded away.
Let him come.
The shadow melted into the darkened corners. Galena swore to herself. She had learned much from the foul creature, increased her power in so many ways because of his past guidance. Yet, much more than Augustus, she would have preferred disposing of Zassex, being rid of his horrid self. The general could be manipulated to a point, but not so her secret companion. With Zassex, the sorcerer played a continual game of cat and mouse, and too often she felt like the latter of the two creatures. However, one did not simply break a pact with Zassex's kind. If done without precautions, Galeno might find herself, minus her limbs and her head, all before he finally let her die. And that made her consider at last something new. He wore Bartok's armor, certainly to be a warrior, a fighter, and, as she had also described him, a simple man, too. In other words, a fool. Galeno knew well how to manipulate such. As a man, he would be defenseless against her charms. As a fool, he would never realize that fact. She would have to see how matters went with both the general and Zassex. If it seemed one or the other still worked to her advantage, Galena would do what she could to tip the balance that way. Malevolent with the armor his to command could certainly deal with her shadowy partner. However, if Zassex gained the enscrolled artifacts first, truly he would be the one to follow. Still, the stranger remained a possibility. Certainly, he could be led around by the nose, told what to do. He presented potential where the other two presented risk. Yes, Galena intended to keep an eye on this fool for her own good. He would be far more susceptible to her desires than an ambitious and slightly mad military commander, and certainly far less dangerous than a demon.